We are running short on time, so Malibu, you have raised your hand. I'm going to ask you to phrase your point in a question as quickly as possible, please. And then Busi, I'll ask you to continue through to the end, and we will open for discussion after. Malibu, please feel free to, yes, go ahead.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Busi, for a wonderful presentation. I think I'm here for solution. And when Busi mentioned that we need new structures, I think the thing is we sometimes have got, us as, having different organizations and, not unified, someone doing this and, all the other organizations doing different things. There is an African Kingdom Federation. I don't know if anyone has heard of it, where the program is about reset. And with the reset, they have actually created a new currency where it's backed by, it's what they call a non-fiat, which is backed by the sun, and I think and the solar system. So I think those are the kind of things that we're looking at, and it's the one that you're going to probably being used throughout the continent, where there is one currency being used in one continent, because at the moment you're talking about the system that we're talking about the system where it's in, talking about the Bretton Woods and all that, but we're still operating the same system rather than having to come up with our own currency where we can trade as one, one continent, using rather than moving from one, country to the other, and all those kind of solutions. So I don't know if anyone is, because those are the kind of things that we should be really, marketing, improving, and trying to make sure that we, we patronize them rather than having to, I understand all that, but, it's the situation. But I think solutions are the one that needs to be driving, Africa forward. So that's what I needed to know. And how if you need more information, I'll be able to do that, because I'm trying to get to know more how they work, but there seems to be having I think it's about 3 years program where they actually trying to give, I think what they're using the kingdoms at the bottom, where people, people on the ground, they just go to they're using what they said, the mobile phones, where they just allocating the resources every single month. And then because currency and money is a tool, so and it makes the value comes to what the value we put into it. So if we use the same currency to facilitate the, what we need to do with that, then that's where the value comes in, rather than having to still look at solutions. We're at this stage and they haven't worked so far, and they've got really quite a huge budget in trying to do that. And one of the other things is the debt cancellation. So they just going through countries and trying to close all the or pay off all the debt. So yeah, that's the bit that I wanted to say, and to find out if anyone knows about it, because the solution is out there.
Busi, do you have a reply to that?
Yeah, so I think I'm seeing here the chat about after, or however way that acronym is get. But I think, sometimes we tend to put the cart before the horse in terms of our Pan-Africanism. Like, I think one of the critical areas we actually have to start building is rebuilding the Pan-African solidarity to begin with, because we can come with solutions, but if the majority of people still are not on the same page about a Pan-African movement, those solutions will not go forward, right? And I think we've lost that over time. And I think that's really one of the barriers, because when you come, let's say, with the currency question, you're going to come on the African continent, and then the West African countries are going to tell you something different. You're going to come to South Africa, where the Reserve Bank is totally capable of having more extensive monetary policy, and it's going to tell you that its mandate, based on the Constitution of South Africa, is to inflation target. And so, I think our Pan-Africanism, in a way, we have to reignite it, but I also think we have to reimagine it in a sense that, like, how do we take into account issues of sovereignty? You know, we talk a lot about sovereignty, like African states deserve their sovereignty. But if you have a Pan-African agenda, then you have to let go of the sovereignty idea, right? There's something about it that will have to go. So I think we have to catch up, and we have to, you know, like, where is that thinking? How do we locate the thinkings of Steve Biko, of Thomas Sankara? Like, who's writing a 2021 Pan-African manifesto that takes into account all the things we know now that they didn't know then? You know, like, who's thinking about, because of course the Pan-African agenda would have been easier if everyone had, you know, the colonial masters left at the same time, everyone was together, and then we could have made all these great grand policies. But countries have moved and shifted, and there's countries that have particular interests in different things, or leaders who've got particular, let's say leaders, because not countries, there's leaders, there's people. And you know, how would we tackle that? And so those are some of the things. I think with the African free trade arrangement, one of the, you know, I've spent the last 2 days with labor unions, and one of their concerns is really a race to the bottom. You know, how do we prevent a race to the bottom, particularly in terms of labor competition? You know, in South Africa, there's already high tensions, right, around people who are not from South Africa working in lower paying jobs than South Africans, not working at the minimum wage. And how do we, and I think one of the challenges is that, how do you really respond to people's concerns? And I think that's where we've been weak as a, I'll say broad left. Where we've been weak as a broad left is that sometimes there are people in the middle, and we're not speaking to these people. We're talking at the right, like we're here. And there are these people in the middle who are like, okay, but I understand that austerity is bad, but Busi, you haven't told me how we're going to get the money. And then Busi, instead of being like, okay, look, this is how we can raise the money to afford all the things we want, and this is how it's sustainable. Busi is like, no, austerity is bad. It's a neoliberalism structure. And like, you know, so I'm talking past that person. And I think part of our Pan-Africanism, what it has to do is respond to those nuanced questions in the middle that address people's real concerns, questions of sovereignty, questions of leadership. Like, if we're going to positively imagine a Pan-African agenda state, I don't know whether people are thinking of a state or whether people are thinking of, we just all have the same policies. Is it a Marxist-Leninist approach, or is it all of us are now one thing approach? I don't know. And that is the question we have to ask ourselves. Is this a Marxist-Leninist, meaning if we're all Marxists, we all have to be Marxist and it has to be globally true, you know, but we can each be our individual states, you know, or what? And I think, yeah, we have to unpack this, you know. Unfortunately, it's not really my area. Maybe I can think about the economics question, but we have to answer those questions. What social questions are we trying to answer? How will we answer them, and how do we understand a new Pan-African agenda? And how do we translate this agenda to many people so that it doesn't sit with a few intellectuals somewhere who've got access to Zoom? Like, how do I tell this in a taxi? You know, what do they call them in different countries? Matatus. How do I share this? Yeah, how do I share this agenda with someone who is selling vegetables at a market? Do they understand this agenda? How will we get, you know, how do we get the shared vision? And of course, back in the day, you know, they were lucky because Mkoto Sizwe had their whole trainings in different countries. The political education was strong. There was serious political education going on back in the day. And in this day, I can barely think of structures like that have continuous political education and so forth. So I'm gonna quickly go through my slides. I've got very few slides left. Whew. And that's been a lot, but to say that corruption, of course, see a lot of countries, I was just going to go through this to say that a lot of countries responded to COVID with various packages between 0.1% and 3% of GDP as a result of the COVID pandemic. So Africa announced a 10% package, which was a lie because, go figure, they've spent less than that. And actually in real financial stimulus terms, how much money was actually pumped into the economy was about 1% of GDP. So lies all around, but I can tell you all about that in, you know, in another time. But anyway, so to say that governments really tried to flatten the curves, but then again, they were going up against, you know, all these issues, the neo-colonial, that's where the decades of neo-colonial, neoliberal, and increasingly financialized forces and structures, right? This is from a paper, by the way. It's called Feminist Responses to COVID-19, and it's on the African continent in particular. And yeah, so a lockdown readiness study showed that on average, only 6.8% of sub-Saharan African households were fully prepared for a lockdown scenario. So we're talking about people's incomes, about, you know, the structures of the economy, who's able to work from home, who isn't. And we know in the global north, a lot of people could work from home. And again, these are gendered, you know, so in South Africa, there's a study that's showing that women struggled more to work from home or to adjust to work from home than men did. And of course, we can imagine because of the extra burdens of unpaid care work in the household did not allow for that. Schools were closed, of course, so you've got all the people at home, which is fun times, apparently, not really, but has come with its own issues. And so, you know, corruption undermined, and we can estimate and hypothesize that it did undermine the healthcare responses. Just because obviously with accelerated public procurement, you're likely to see, you know, like all these things are fast. And so corruption was likely heightened. To what extent, there's no absolute measure, but I'm sure people will be writing theses about this for the rest of like humanity about corruption during COVID in Africa. You already see this. There's an article here that I saw about Africa's COVID-19 corruption that outweighs pandemic. So of course, the obsession of Africa remains. But I also wanted to raise here that, you know, in the United States, there's been cases of corruption. There's been cases of corruption in the United Kingdom. There's been cases of corruption globally. Yet, again, it's this issue. Why is it that Africa is written about in this format? Whereas other countries, it's singular, you know, like if you go to this link, it's about America specifically, it's about United Kingdom specifically. And so, of course, this seems way more than if we look at these individual countries. And so what is needed, again, it's questions more than anything. So here I argue that what is happening in a lot of our countries is that we do vertical approaches to dealing with corruption, which is you set up commissions, you punish people afterwards, you know, and then it's all done. But what is needed are both vertical and horizontal. And what I mean by vertical is that these structures of post-corruption activity where, you know, people are held to account, but horizontal meaning how do we strategically put in place institutions that prevent corruption? So how do you incentivize within the institutional design itself? How do you take into account what types of corruption might happen and how to prevent that, so to speak? I mean, we can learn from the banks, right? For example, like, why is it that when someone works for a bank, they can't loan money to their family member, right? That is an anti-corruption strategy. It's a horizontal anti-corruption strategy, which says that a particular set of rules or whatever must be followed and disclosed and so forth. So we have to think about that, but also have to transcend the conceptually monolithic view of corruption, which I've already covered. But just some questions here, you know, what function does corruption play in the financial global capitalist system, which we've already started talking about? But what's not just about the function, or what is it about the global capitalist system that reproduces corruption is probably a better social question to answer. And how do we understand the various types in various countries? What measures are needed to really respond? And how do we construct incentives for these rule-breaking actors such that it is in their interest to deliver better outcomes with less corruption? Because corruption, again, we've already agreed, it will always be part of the world. But how do we get it to a point where people deliver? And in South Africa, sometimes I call this high-performing corruption. But high-performing corruption is also dangerous because it's performing corruption that takes its cut. And sometimes the cuts are very high. You know, it could have been 5 more schools built, but now we don't get 5 more schools because the corruption here delivered 1 school, but then we lost out on 5 schools. And what institutions are needed. So I'm going to end there. I know we're just at the time, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Busi. That was very enlightening. A lot of solid insights. The comments say it. Our director, Nigel, says it as well. He's been very involved. You've got me on the edge of my seat as well. And I thank you as well for pushing through for a full 2 hours. That can be quite arduous. So we really appreciate you sharing. There's so much more questions coming in for you, but I think we can find a way to mediate that, let it happen over time. And we should let you go respectfully. So thank you so much to Busi Sibeko. Everyone in the chat, as usual, as you sign out, please drop a message in the chat just thanking her, letting her know how much you felt her. It's really a good, wholesome message. So please in the chat, just drop your thanks to Busi. She will appreciate that. Now, as we sign you all off and we end the call, just know that at this time next week, we will be hosting Alvin Mosioma. He's a director of the Tax Justice Network based in Kenya. We are in such good company with this series, and each speaker is coming through with such great, valuable information. So Busi, you're a killer. Thank you so much for that. And to all of you who are involved, thank you for making the discussion what it is. We're going to be terminating the session now.
Thank you everyone for having me, and enjoy my good friend Alvin next week.
Thank you.